My parents bought my sister a villa, but gave me the documents for the payment. It's your duty to pay this $650,000 debt. I refused, and they sued me. So the judge saw the truth. My name is Nadine. I am 32 years old, and if you saw me walking down a busy street in Boston with my sensible heels and my leather briefcase, you would probably think I have it all figured out. I work as a senior financial analyst. My life is built on spreadsheets, risk assessments, and cold, hard logic. I like things that balance. I like things that make sense. But for the longest time, the one thing in my life that never made a lick of sense was my own family. I grew up in a comfortable middle-class neighborhood in Connecticut, the kind of place where the lawns are always mowed and the secrets are kept behind expensive curtains. My parents, Roland and Vivian, were the pillars of that community. And then there was my sister, Sienna. Sienna is 4 years younger than me, 28 now, and for as long as I can remember, she has been the center of the universe. In our house, there was an unspoken law. Nadine exists to be useful, and Sienna exists to be adored. I call myself the glass child. Not because I am fragile, but because my parents looked right through me to see whatever Sienna wanted. I was the invisible workhorse. By the time I was 10, I was doing my own laundry and packing my own lunches because Vivian was too busy driving Sienna to dance lessons or soothing her because she had a tiny scratch on her knee. I remember one specific summer when I was 17. I had been working double shifts at a greasy, soul-crushing diner at the edge of town. My feet were constantly swollen, and I smelled like old fries every single day. I was saving every penny because I needed dental work. I had a cavity that was killing me and a wisdom tooth that was coming in sideways. When I asked Roland for help with the bill, he looked at me like I was asking for a kidney. He told me that a big girl like me needed to learn the value of $1 and that they just did not have the extra cash. 2 weeks later, Roland came home with a set of keys and a huge, stupid grin on his face. He had bought Sienna a brand new car. Why? Because she had finally passed her history class with a C-. They threw a party for her. They toasted to her brilliance while I sat in the corner, chewing on the side of my mouth to avoid the throbbing pain in my teeth, realizing that my father's value of $1 speech only applied to the daughter he did not actually like. I worked those extra shifts, paid my own medical bills, and learned a lesson much more valuable than the one Roland intended. In this family, I was on my own. I buried that resentment deep down, though. I kept achieving, kept working, hoping that maybe if I became successful enough, they would finally look at me and see someone worthy of the same love they threw at Sienna for just existing. When it came time for college, the script stayed exactly the same. Roland and Vivian made it very clear that they would not be contributing a single dollar to my education. They claimed they needed to keep their liquid assets available for Sienna's future. I did not cry. I did not beg. I just went to work. I took out every student loan available, worked 20 hours a week in the campus library, and spent my summers doing manual labor. I survived on those 25-cent packs of instant noodles for 4 years. I remember the salt stinging my throat and the constant, dull ache of hunger in my stomach. But I did it. I graduated with honors, landed a job at a top firm in Boston, and started climbing. I lived in a studio apartment so small I could reach the fridge from my bed, and I put every spare cent toward my debt. By 30, I was debt-free. I had a respectable emergency fund. I had a modest but beautiful apartment that I owned. I had built a fortress of financial security around myself. Meanwhile, Sienna was busy being a professional failure. She dropped out of 3 different art schools. Each time, my parents paid the full tuition up front. They paid for her apartments, her clothes, her Coachella tickets, and her finding herself trips to Tulum. They never questioned her. They never asked for a budget. When she moved back into their basement at 27, they treated it like a holiday. I stayed away mostly. I would go home for the occasional Thanksgiving, endure the comments about how lucky I was to be so successful, and then drive back to my quiet life in Boston. I thought I had one. I thought that by becoming independent, I had removed their power to hurt me. I thought my money was mine, my credit was mine, and my future was safe. I was so incredibly wrong. I did not realize that to people like Roland and Vivian, my success was not a source of pride, it was an untapped resource. It was a rainy Tuesday in mid-April. You know those days in New England where the sky is just a flat, miserable gray and the wind bites through your coat? I had worked a 10-hour shift, analyzing market volatility and dealing with demanding clients. I just wanted a glass of wine and my bed. I grabbed my mail on the way up to my apartment. Mostly junk, a few utility bills, and then a thick, heavy envelope. The return address was from a premium mortgage firm I had never done business with. My first thought was that it was just some aggressive marketing for a high-interest loan. But when I sat down at my kitchen table and pulled the documents out, my heart did not just skip a beat, it stopped. They were mortgage closing documents for a property at 2470 Oakwood Drive in Winchester. I knew Winchester. It is one of the most expensive, affluent suburbs outside of Boston. We are talking luxury estates, manicured hedges, and multi-million-dollar price tags. The document stated that I, Nadine, was the primary borrower for a luxury villa. The loan amount was $650,000. The monthly payment was calculated at nearly $4,000. I felt the air leave the room. My vision tunneled until all I could see was my own name printed in bold ink. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck, and a high-pitched ringing started in my ears. I scrambled through the pages, my hands shaking so hard I nearly tore the paper. And then I saw it. The signature page. There it was. My signature. Or at least, it looked exactly like my signature. Every loop, every slant, every sharp edge of the N was perfect. But I had never been to Winchester. I had never spoken to this mortgage company. I had never signed a single thing. I collapsed onto my kitchen floor, the cold tile pressing against my skin as I tried to breathe. A $650,000 debt. My credit, my reputation, my entire life was now tied to a house I did not own. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, exactly who had done this. My mother, Vivian, had always been a talented artist. She used to joke about how she could mimic anyone's handwriting. It was not a joke anymore. It was a crime. They had stolen my life to buy a villa, and they did not even have the decency to tell me. I spent that entire Tuesday night calling Roland and Vivian. I must have dialed their numbers 50 times each. Every single call went straight to voicemail. I sent texts. I sent emails. Nothing but silence. The realization that they were intentionally dodging me made the panic turn into a slow, bubbling rage. I did not sleep a wink. I sat on my sofa, staring at those documents, tracing the forged lines of my name until the sun started to peek through the gray Boston clouds. I called my office and told them I was taking a personal day. Then I got in my car. The drive from Boston to their house in Connecticut usually takes about 2 hours. That morning, it felt like an eternity. The rain was still coming down, blurring the windshield as I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind was a chaotic mess of how and why. How did they get my social security number? Then I remembered. A few months ago, Vivian had called me, acting all sweet and motherly, asking if I still had my old childhood medical records because she was organizing the family safe. I had given her the information she needed, thinking she was finally being a parent. I was such a fool. They had used my tax returns from when I lived at home, my childhood records, and my mother's artistic talent to build a paper version of me that could qualify for a luxury loan. They had shopped for a villa while I was working my fingers to the bone. As I pulled into their driveway and saw Sienna's car parked there, I felt a wave of nausea. They were all in there. They were probably celebrating. I did not knock. I used my old key, the one I kept for emergencies, and slammed the door open. The house smelled like cinnamon and expensive coffee. I found them in the living room. Vivian was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, and Roland was reading the paper. Sienna was there too, looking through a catalog for high-end furniture. "Nadine." "What a surprise," Vivian said, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary sweetness. She did not even look guilty. She got up to pour me some tea like this was just a casual Wednesday visit. I threw the mortgage documents onto the coffee table, scattering Sienna's furniture magazines. Explain this. Right now, I demanded. My voice was shaking, but it was not from fear anymore. Roland did not even flinch. He just set his paper down and looked at me with that tired, disappointed expression he had used on me my whole life. He told me to sit down and stop being so dramatic. He said they had been meaning to talk to me, but they wanted to get everything finalized first. Then came the twisted logic. Roland sat there and told me, to my face, that because I was doing so well in my career, it was my family duty to ensure that Sienna had a proper lifestyle. He said that since Sienna's credit was a little messy and she didn't have a steady job, she could never qualify for a house. But the villa in Winchester was perfect for her. It was close to the city, it was a good investment, and it was what a loving sister would do. Sienna chimed in then, her voice whiny and entitled. She told me she had already picked out the curtains for the master bedroom. She said I was always so obsessed with my promotions and my investments, and that it was only fair that I shared some of that success with the people who raised me. I felt like I was in an alternate reality. I told them this was identity theft. I told them this was a felony. I looked at Vivian and told her I knew she forged my signature. She just shrugged and said, "Family doesn't use words like forgery, Nadine. We used your information because we are one unit." I lost it. I told them I was not a unit. I told them I was an individual who worked for every cent I had, and I would not pay a single penny for a villa I never wanted. Roland stood up then, his face turning a dark, angry red. He told me that if I did not step up and accept this responsibility, I was no longer a part of this family. He told me I was selfish, cold, and that he would disown me. I looked at the three of them, the people who were supposed to love me, and I realized they did not see a daughter or a sister. They saw a golden goose. I told them, fine. Disown me. But I am reporting this as fraud to the bank today. I walked out of that house and did not look back, even as Roland screamed my name from the porch. Listen, before we get to the really messy part of the story, I want to ask you for a quick favor. If this story is hitting home for you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Leave a comment with the name of your city below. Every single interaction helps this video reach more people who might be going through something similar. Thank you so much for the support. I drove back to Boston in a daze, my hands gripping the wheel so hard they cramped. As soon as I got home, I did not go to bed. I called my best friend, Naomi. Naomi has been my rock since freshman year of college. She is the kind of friend who doesn't just offer a shoulder to cry on, she offers a plan of attack. Nadine, you need to stop crying and start calling lawyers, Naomi told me firmly. This isn't a family spat anymore. This is a Sautram non muoi non du la bullet headed for your brain. She connected me with a man named Desmond. Desmond was a high-stakes litigation attorney who specialized in financial crimes and family disputes. We met in his office the very next day. His office was all dark wood and leather, and he had the kind of calm, steady eyes that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't be crushed by this. I handed him the documents. I told him the whole story, the childhood favoritism, the dental bills, the stolen social security number, the forgery. Desmond listened without interrupting, his pen moving steadily across a legal pad. When I finished, he didn't sugarcoat it. What your parents did is federal mortgage fraud and felony identity theft, Desmond said. But here is the ugly part, Nadine. Because they're your parents, and because they have your information, the bank is going to be incredibly skeptical. They're going to assume you were in on it until the deal went sour. He told me the retainer fee to take the case would be $10,000. I felt a pang in my chest as I wrote the check. That was a huge chunk of the savings I had spent years building. But Desmond told me it was an investment in my survival. We spent the afternoon filing formal fraud affidavits and sending cease and desist letters to Roland and Vivian. The weight of it all started to sink in. My career as a financial analyst depended on my integrity and my credit score. If this fraud wasn't cleared, I could lose my license. I could lose everything I had worked for since I was 17. I went home that night and stared at the ceiling, wondering how the people who gave me life could be so comfortable with destroying it. I thought the legal letters would make them back down. I thought they would realize they had gone too far and try to fix it. I was wrong again. Roland and Vivian did not do backing down. They did war. A few days later, Naomi called me, her voice panicked. Nadine, have you seen what Sienna is posting? I opened TikTok and felt my stomach drop. Sienna had posted a video of herself crying real, big, cinematic tears in front of the villa in Winchester. The caption read, "My wealthy sister is trying to sue our parents and throw me out on the street because she's greedy." She had thousands of likes. She had started a GoFundMe titled "Save Sienna from Homelessness," and she was telling the world that I was a cold, heartless corporate monster who hated my own family. Then, the phone calls started. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years were leaving me disgusting voicemails. They called me ungrateful, a traitor, and evil. They said I should be ashamed of myself for having so much money and refusing to help my baby sister. But the worst part came on Friday. My boss, a man who usually keeps to himself, called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable. "Nadine, I received a very strange phone call this morning," he said. "A man claiming to be your father, Roland, called our human resources department. He told them that you are suffering from a severe psychiatric breakdown. He claimed you are making false accusations about financial fraud because you've lost touch with reality." I felt the blood drain from my face. They weren't just trying to steal my money anymore. They were trying to ruin my reputation so that no one would believe my claims of fraud. I had to sit there and explain the entire, sordid situation to my boss. Thankfully, he knew my work ethic, but I could see the seed of doubt in his eyes. The stress was becoming a physical thing. I wasn't eating. I was losing hair in clumps every time I brushed it. I felt like I was being hunted by the people who were supposed to be my pack. The isolation was the hardest part. My phone was a constant source of toxicity, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of my family's lies. But then, on a Saturday morning, I received two things that changed everything. The first was a small, hand-addressed envelope. Inside was a letter from my grandma Beatrice, Roland's mother. Beatrice was 84 and lived in a quiet assisted living facility. She wrote that she had heard what was happening through the family grapevine. "Nadine, my dear," the letter read. "I have watched Roland and Vivian treat you like a tool for years, and I am so deeply sorry I stayed silent to keep the peace. You are right to fight. Do not let them break you." Tucked inside the letter was a cashier's check for $5,000. It was a huge amount for her. She wrote that it was for your battle. I sat at my kitchen table and cried for the first time in weeks. I wasn't completely alone. The second thing was a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. It was my Uncle Julian, Roland's younger brother. I hadn't seen Julian in over 15 years. He had vanished from family gatherings when I was a kid, and no one ever explained why. "Nadine, it's Julian," he said. His voice was gravelly and tired. "I saw the drama on social media. I know what they're doing to you." I asked him why he was calling, and what he said chilled me to the bone. Julian told me that back in the 1990s, Roland had done the exact same thing to him. Roland had forged Julian's signature on a series of business loans to fund a failed real estate venture. When the business went under, Julian was left with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. "I didn't fight back, Nadine," Julian said. "I was young, I was scared, and I believed that family meant I had to take the hit. It ruined my life. I lost my house, my credit was destroyed for a decade, and I had to move across the country just to start over." He told me that this was a pattern. Roland had learned it from their own father, and now he was trying to pass the curse on to me. Julian told me that I was the first one in 3 generations who had the guts to say no. "You aren't just fighting for a mortgage, kid," Julian told me. "You're breaking a generational curse of financial abuse. Don't you dare give up." I hung up the phone and felt something in me harden. The fear was still there, but it was being eclipsed by a cold, sharp resolve. I called Desmond immediately. "Desmond, I don't care what it costs," I told him. "I want to go to trial. I want every lie they told, every document they forged, and every person they tried to ruin brought into the light. We aren't just defending a lawsuit anymore. We are ending this." The morning I was officially served with the lawsuit papers, the Boston sky was a bruised shade of purple, heavy with the promise of another miserable spring storm. I was leaving my apartment, my mind already halfway through a complex risk assessment for a high-profile client at the firm, when a man in a nondescript, slightly wrinkled suit approached me near the mailboxes. He didn't look like a threat, just a man doing a job he probably hated. He asked for my name in a flat, tired voice. When I confirmed I was Nadine, he handed me a thick, heavy envelope and said those words that officially shattered any remaining hope of a quiet resolution. "Nadine, you have been served." I sat in my car for 20 minutes, the engine idling and the wipers slapping against the glass, as I read through the 37 pages of absolute fiction. It is one thing to know your parents are angry and delusional. It is quite another to see your own name listed as a defendant in a formal legal case titled Roland and Vivian versus Nadine. They were actually doing it. They were suing me for the full $650,000, the entire value of that luxury villa in Winchester they had fraudulently purchased using my identity. The legal complaint was a masterpiece of revisionist history and psychological projection. It claimed that I had entered into a binding verbal family contract to provide for my sister's housing as a way of repaying my parents for my expensive upbringing. It argued that because Roland and Vivian had sacrificed everything for my education, which was a bold-faced lie since I paid for every credit hour myself, I was now legally and morally obligated to subsidize Sienna's life. They even had the audacity to claim unjust enrichment, as if my hard-earned career success was a communal family asset that I was selfishly hoarding from my struggling sister. I felt a surge of cold, sharp fury as I read their description of our family dynamics. They painted themselves as the benevolent agents of my will, claiming they acted in good faith to secure the property because I had supposedly given them the green light during a family dinner that never actually took place. It was a legal fantasy designed to intimidate me into settling. They thought the mere sight of a courtroom would make me fold like a house of cards. They thought the fear of a public scandal would make me write the check and beg for their forgiveness. The weight of the situation started to press down on my chest like a ton of lead. $650,000. To most people, that is just a large number on a screen. To me, it was decades of my life. It was every promotion I had fought for with sweat and tears, every late night at the office while others were out having fun, and every sacrifice I had made to be independent of their toxicity. And here were the people who were supposed to be my protectors, trying to use the legal system to strip it all away and hand it to a sister who had never worked a full week in her life. I felt a profound sense of betrayal that went beyond the money. It was the realization that in their eyes, I wasn't a daughter. I was a retirement plan with a heartbeat, a resource to be mined until I was empty. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, realizing that the bridge wasn't just burned, it was obliterated. I didn't go to work that day. I couldn't. I drove straight to the office of Desmond, the litigation attorney Naomi had recommended. His office was in a sleek building in the Seaport District, all glass and cold steel, reflecting the harbor water. I sat in his waiting room, clutching the lawsuit papers, feeling like my entire life was being reduced to a case number. When Desmond finally saw me, he looked at the papers with a grim, practiced expression. He didn't offer me a handkerchief or tell me everything would be fine. He just started taking notes. "This is a classic intimidation tactic, Nadine," he said, his voice as steady as a surgeon's. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on, but they have the power to make your life a living hell for the next year." Then came the part that hurt the most, the bill. Desmond explained that to fight a case like this, with the level of discovery and depositions required to prove fraud against family members, would require a $10,000 retainer fee immediately. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened my banking app. I had spent 10 years building my financial fortress, dollar by dollar. Seeing that much money leave my account in a single transaction felt like a physical blow to the stomach. It was money I had saved for my own future, for a house that was actually mine, or for a real emergency. "Think of it as an investment in your freedom," Desmond said, noticing my hesitation. I nodded and authorized the transfer. But as I walked out of his office, the reality of my situation settled in. I was officially in a war of attrition. Roland and Vivian were banking on the fact that they could outlast me emotionally and financially. They knew I had a reputation to protect at the firm. They knew I valued my credit score above almost everything else. I went home and did something I hadn't done since my freshman year of college. I made a list of every single non-essential expense I could cut. No more gym membership. No more weekend trips with Naomi. No more ordering in after a long shift. I was back to survival mode, but this time the enemy wasn't poverty, it was my own flesh and blood. I sat at my small dining table, the one I had bought with my first big bonus, and I realized that my parents were literally stealing my time and my peace. Every hour I spent worrying about this lawsuit was an hour they were taking from my life. I looked at my credit report that evening. The $650,000 mortgage was already showing up as an inquiry, and my score had already taken a small hit. It felt like a stain on my record, a mark of a crime I didn't commit. I realized then that if I didn't win this, I wouldn't just be out of money, I would be locked out of the financial world I had worked so hard to enter. I was 32 years old, and I was being forced to fight for the right to own my own name. I didn't sleep that night. I just watched the rain lash against my window, counting the minutes until I could call Desmond again and ask what our next move was. I thought the legal battle would be confined to the courtroom and Desmond's office. I was naive. Roland and Vivian knew that my career was my pride and joy, and they decided to strike me where it would hurt the most. It started with a phone call from our human resources director, a woman named Mrs. Sterling who had always been kind to me. She asked if I could come down to her office for a brief, sensitive chat. When I walked in, she looked deeply uncomfortable. She had a file open on her desk, and I saw a transcript of a phone call. "Nadine," she began, her voice soft but serious. "A man calling himself your father, Roland, has been calling our main line repeatedly. He's been speaking to various departments, claiming that you're in the middle of a severe mental health crisis. He told our benefits coordinator that you are making dangerous and delusional accusations about your family because you've lost touch with reality due to work stress." I felt the blood drain from my face. I could feel the invisible eyes of the entire firm on me. In the world of high-stakes finance, your stability is your currency. If people think you are cracking under pressure, you are a liability. My father knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just trying to hurt me, he was trying to invalidate my testimony before it ever reached a judge. He wanted everyone to think I was a crazy daughter so that when I said he forged my signature, people would just shake their heads and offer pity instead of justice. I had to sit there for an hour explaining the entire, sordid situation to Mrs. Sterling. I had to show her the lawsuit papers. I had to reveal the most shameful parts of my family life to a woman who was practically a stranger. It was humiliating. I felt like a little girl again, being shamed for something I didn't do. Thankfully, the firm has seen its fair share of messy family disputes, and Mrs. Sterling was professional about it, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. I could see it in the way my colleagues looked at me in the break room, a mixture of curiosity and caution. That same evening, Naomi sent me a link to a TikTok video. It was Sienna. She was standing in the marble-tiled foyer of the Winchester Villa, wearing an expensive-looking sweater and holding a glass of wine. She was crying, those perfect, cinematic tears that she had used to get out of trouble her entire life. She was telling her 20,000 followers about her heartless, corporate-climbing sister who was trying to sue their elderly parents and throw her out onto the street out of pure spite. The comments were a cesspool of hate directed at me. People were calling for me to be fired. They were digging through my social media, finding photos of me at work events, and calling me a greedy elitist. Sienna had even linked a GoFundMe for her legal defense and housing security, and it was already at $5,000. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting a lawsuit, I was fighting a war for my reputation on two fronts. My parents were attacking my professional life, and my sister was destroying my social standing. I felt like I was being buried alive under a mountain of lies, and every time I tried to dig myself out, they just threw more dirt on top. By the end of the second month of the lawsuit, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. I had lost 12 pounds. My skin was pale and sallow, and the dark circles under my eyes were so deep that no amount of concealer could hide them. I was working 60 hours a week to prove to my firm that I wasn't mentally unstable, and then I was spending my nights going through old emails and bank statements for Desmond. The physical toll was becoming impossible to ignore. My hair was falling out in such large clumps that I had to start wearing it in a tight, painful bun to hide the thinning patches. I was having panic attacks in the middle of the night, waking up drenched in sweat, convinced I was drowning in a sea of debt I could never pay off. I would sit on the edge of my bed, gasping for air, clutching my chest as if I could physically hold my heart together. Roland and Vivian continued their campaign of psychological warfare. They started calling me from blocked numbers at 3 in the morning, knowing I would have my phone on for work emergencies. When I would answer, there would just be silence, or the sound of my mother's soft, theatrical weeping. They sent me reminders of family trips we had taken when I was a child, photos of me smiling with Sienna, with captions like, "Remember when you still had a soul," or "Family is forever, Nadine." You'll learn that the hard way. The isolation was the hardest part. My phone was a constant source of toxicity. Even the family members who weren't actively attacking me were staying neutral, which felt like its own kind of betrayal. My Aunt Brenda, whom I used to adore, called me to suggest that maybe I should just compromise and pay half the mortgage to keep the peace. "Is your pride really worth destroying your mother's health, Nadine?" she asked, her voice dripping with judgment. "Vivian is a wreck because of this. Just do the right thing for once." The right thing was always my sacrifice. It was never Roland and Vivian taking responsibility for their crimes. It was never Sienna getting a job. It was always Nadine, the successful one, being forced to set herself on fire to keep everyone else warm. I started to withdraw from everyone, even Naomi. I felt like I was radioactive, like my drama was too much for anyone to handle. I would spend my weekends in a darkened apartment, the blinds drawn, staring at the ceiling and wondering how it had come to this. How had the people who gave me life become the ones I needed legal protection from? I realized that I was grieving. I wasn't just grieving the loss of my relationship with my parents. I was grieving the loss of the fantasy that they ever actually loved me as a person. I was mourning the daughter I had tried so hard to be, the one who thought that if she just worked hard enough and achieved enough, she would finally be worthy of their respect. That daughter was dead. She had been murdered by a $650,000 mortgage and a forged signature. In her place was someone harder, colder, and much more dangerous. I looked at the legal files on my desk and realized that I didn't want their love anymore. I wanted their defeat. I wanted the truth to be so bright that they couldn't find a single shadow to hide in. The morning of the trial finally arrived, and for the first time in months, the sun was actually shining over Boston. It was a crisp, clear day, but I felt like I was walking into a blizzard. The county courthouse was a cold, imposing stone building with massive pillars that seemed designed to make everyone who entered feel small and insignificant. I arrived at 8:15, wearing my sharpest navy blue power suit, the one I usually wore when I had to tell a CEO that their company was failing. I needed that armor today. Desmond met me on the steps, his briefcase looking like a weapon of war. He didn't say much, just gave me a quick nod. "Remember, Nadine," he said as we walked through the metal detectors. "Stick to the facts. Don't let them bait you into an emotional reaction. That's what they're banking on." We walked into courtroom 4B, and the atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a knife. Roland and Vivian were already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with their expensive-looking, silver-haired lawyer. They looked like the picture of a respectable, middle-class couple who had been deeply wronged by a cold-hearted daughter. Vivian was clutching a lace handkerchief, her eyes already red from what I knew were theatrical tears. Roland sat rigidly, staring straight ahead with an expression of grim, paternal disappointment. Sienna was sitting in the front row of the gallery, wearing a modest, pale blue dress that screamed innocent victim. When our eyes met, she didn't look sad or scared. She shot me a venomous, entitled look that said she still believed she was going to win her villa. She actually looked smug, as if the legal system was just another person she could manipulate with a pout and a sob story. Judge Penelope entered at exactly 9 o'clock. She was a woman in her late 50s with close-cropped gray hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses that seemed to look right through every lie told in her presence. She moved through the preliminary motions with a terrifyingly quiet efficiency. Then it was time. Roland was called to the stand first. It was a masterclass in revisionist history and emotional manipulation. Roland talked about family values, the sanctity of the home, and the American dream. He spoke about how he and Vivian had poured their lives and every cent into my upbringing. He had the gall to look the judge in the eye and say that they had naturally assumed I would want to do the same for my sister because that's what a successful, loving daughter does. He described a series of conversations we supposedly had over Thanksgiving where I had joyfully agreed to help Sienna secure her future. I sat at my table, my hands folded, watching the court reporter's fingers flying across the keys, recording every deluded, arrogant lie. He really believed he owned my success. He really believed that because he was my father, my identity was his to use however he saw fit. It was chilling to see how easily he could twist the truth to fit his own narrative of entitlement. Roland stayed on the stand for nearly 2 hours. His testimony was a winding, emotional saga designed to pull at the judge's heartstrings. He talked about how hard it was for Sienna to find her footing in a cruel, modern world, and how he and Vivian were just trying to provide a safety net for their youngest child. "We didn't think we needed a formal contract, Your Honor," Roland said, leaning forward with a weary sigh. "Nadine has always been so generous. We've had a verbal agreement for years that once she reached a certain salary level, she would step up for the family. We acted as her agents in good faith to secure this home because the market was moving so fast. We didn't want her sister to lose out on a beautiful opportunity." When Judge Penelope asked him point-blank if I had ever explicitly signed the mortgage documents in his presence, he didn't even blink. He started to hedge, talking about implied consent and how I had given them my social security number willingly. He argued that because I hadn't explicitly said no during a vague conversation about Sienna's future, that constituted a yes for a $650,000 debt. He actually tried to suggest that as my father, he had an inherent, patriarchal right to manage my financial affairs for the greater good of the Wilson family. "Family isn't about paperwork, Judge," he said, sounding like a character in a bad soap opera. "It's about trust. We trusted our daughter to do the right thing, and she's trying to use legal technicalities to abandon her responsibilities." I felt a wave of nausea. He was so convincing. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed him myself. He was painting me as a cold, calculating monster who was using my fancy Boston education to bully my elderly parents. Vivian was nodding along from the table, dabbing at her eyes with the handkerchief. Then it was Desmond's turn for cross-examination. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace around the room like a TV lawyer. He stayed right behind our table, calm and deadly. He started by asking Roland a very simple question. "Mr. Wilson, do you know the legal definition of forgery?" Roland scoffed, his face turning a dark, angry red. "I don't know what you're implying. I prefer to think of it as acting on someone's behalf out of love and necessity." "Is it acting out of love to explicitly plan to deceive your daughter because you knew she would refuse to sign those papers if you asked her?" Desmond asked, his voice dropping an octave. "I don't know what you're talking about," Roland snapped. "Nadine was always on board until she got greedy and started listening to people like you." I saw Desmond glance at me, a small, cold glint in his eye. He reached for his laptop. "Mr. Wilson, we've spent quite a bit of money on digital forensics. I'd like to show the court something we recovered from your personal cloud storage." I watched Roland's expression change, just for a split second, from righteous anger to a flicker of pure, unadulterated terror. He knew what was coming. The web of lies was about to be hit by a hurricane of evidence. The large monitor in the courtroom flickered to life, and the white background of a text message thread filled the screen. Desmond scrolled down to a Sunday night in late February. He highlighted a specific exchange between Roland and Vivian. "Mr. Wilson, please read the message you sent to your wife at 9:42 p.m. on February 21st, Desmond commanded. Roland stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open. He didn't say a word. Desmond read it for him, his voice echoing in the silent, tense room. The lender says our debt-to-income ratio is too high. We need a cosigner with a higher credit score and significant liquid assets. Nadine is the only one in the family who fits. If we don't get her on the loan, Sienna loses the villa. Then, Desmond highlighted Vivian's response. Nadine will never agree to this if we ask her directly. She thinks she's so superior with her Boston life and her spreadsheets. Better to just move forward with the paperwork and present it as a done deal once the house is closed. She's always been too independent for her own good, but once the papers are signed and Sienna is moved into the villa, what can she really do? She won't let her own sister become homeless, no matter how much she complains. She'll fall in line to protect her precious credit score. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the courthouse carpet. I watched my father's face turn from a mottled gray to a sickly, pale white. He looked at the monitor, then at Vivian, who had stopped crying and was now staring at the floor with a look of pure, frozen horror. Sienna had slumped in her seat, her innocent victim mask completely shattered. "Does this look like implied consent to you, Mr. Wilson?" Desmond asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Does this look like a verbal agreement between a loving family? Or does it look like a premeditated plot to commit felony identity theft and mortgage fraud against your own child?" Roland didn't answer. He couldn't. He sat there, trapped in his own digital shadow. Desmond then moved to the emails where Vivian had bragged to a friend about how easy it was to mimic my handwriting because I didn't have any flair to my signature. He presented the forensic report showing that the mortgage documents had been signed from a computer at my parents' house at a time when my phone's GPS showed I was in a meeting at my firm in Boston. The devastation was total. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was an execution of their lies. Every family value they had claimed, every sacrifice they had mentioned, was revealed to be nothing more than a cover for their own greed and lack of respect for me as a human being. I looked at the three of them, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel any resentment. I didn't feel any anger. I just felt a profound sense of pity. They had destroyed everything, our family, their reputation, their future, all for a villa in Winchester that they couldn't even afford. They had gambled my life away, and they had lost everything on a single hand. Judge Penelope did not wait long to issue her ruling. She sat back in her high-leather chair and looked at Roland and Vivian with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust that I will remember for the rest of my life. She didn't look like a judge in that moment. She looked like a force of nature. "I have been on this bench for a long time," she began, her voice echoing through the courtroom, vibrating with a quiet, controlled anger. "And I have rarely seen a more egregious, cold-hearted abuse of parental trust and the legal system than what I have witnessed here today. To use your child's identity as a personal piggy bank is not family values. It is a crime. To plot and scheme to ruin your daughter's hard-earned reputation to cover for your own greed is a moral failing that this court cannot even begin to quantify." She didn't just dismiss their lawsuit, she dismissed it with prejudice, meaning they could never, ever bring these claims against me again as long as they lived. The door to that particular nightmare was officially locked and bolted. But she wasn't done. She granted our motion for sanctions, ordering Roland and Vivian to pay $15,000 of my legal fees as a penalty for filing what she called a frivolous, bad faith, and frankly insulting lawsuit. "This is not a game, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson," the judge continued, her eyes flashing behind her glasses. "You have abused the judicial process to harass and intimidate your own daughter. You have lied under oath. You have presented fabricated evidence of a verbal contract that never existed." Then, she turned her attention to the forgery itself. She stated for the record that the evidence of criminal identity theft and mortgage fraud was overwhelming. She announced that she was formally referring the entire case file to the district attorney's office for an immediate criminal investigation into the forgery of the $650,000 mortgage. I saw Roland's hands shaking on the railing of the witness stand. He looked like he was about to collapse. Finally, she looked directly at me. "Miss Nadine," she said, and her voice softened just a fraction, but it was still firm. "The law does not require you to set your own life on fire just to keep people warm who do not respect your existence. This court recognizes your independence and your right to say no to those who would exploit you. You are cleared of all responsibility for this debt." She then issued a strict, 90-day temporary restraining order, preventing any of them, Roland, Vivian, or Sienna, from contacting me in any way, shape, or form. No calls, no texts, no social media tags, and no third-party messages through aunts or cousins. When the gavel hit the wood, the sound was like a thunderclap that cleared the air of a long-overdue storm. I didn't cheer. I didn't even look over at them. I didn't want to see the tears that I knew were coming, the real ones this time, the ones born of consequence rather than manipulation. I just stood up, shook Desmond's hand, and walked out of that courtroom into the bright Boston sun. For the first time in 32 years, I wasn't the useful daughter. I wasn't the invisible child. I was just Nadine. And for the first time, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. The fallout from the judge's ruling was swift and devastating for Roland, Vivian, and Sienna. It was like watching a house of cards falling in a high wind. Everything they had built on lies simply crumbled away. Within 10 days, the mortgage company, officially notified of the court's findings of fraud, formally cleared my name and my social security number from every single record associated with that Winchester property. I received an official letter from their legal department, apologizing for the oversight, though we all knew it was because of the judge's referral to the district attorney. Because Sienna didn't have a job, any credit, or a single cent of her own money, the bank immediately moved to foreclose on the luxury villa. The dream home they had stolen my identity to buy was gone before the summer even hit its peak. Sienna was forced to pack her expensive designer clothes and move back into the basement in Connecticut. But this time, there were no celebration parties. There were no toasts to her brilliance. Through the family grapevine, mostly from Aunt Brenda, who was suddenly very apologetic, I heard that the atmosphere in the house was toxic. Roland and Vivian were constantly screaming at each other, each blaming the other for the legal disaster. Faced with the $15,000 in sanctions they owed me, their own massive attorney fees, and the loss of their reputation, they were forced to file for personal bankruptcy. Every asset they had, including the home I had grown up in, was now under scrutiny. The district attorney eventually decided not to pursue formal criminal charges, citing the civil remedies already in place and my own official statement that I didn't wish to spend the next 2 years of my life testifying in a criminal trial. I didn't want them in jail. I just wanted them out of my life. I wanted the cycle to stop. But the social death was real. The pillars of the community were now the people who tried to ruin their own daughter. Their friends stopped calling. Their country club membership was revoked. They were pariahs in the neighborhood they had worked so hard to impress. I watched it all from a distance, like watching a fire burn itself out on the horizon. I felt a lingering, quiet grief for the family I wished I had, but I felt absolutely no guilt for the people I actually had. They had built their own cage, and they had walked into it with their eyes wide open. I went back to my life in Boston, resumed my 401k contributions, and finally, for the first time in months, I slept for 8 hours without a single nightmare. I started going back to the gym. I started drinking coffee again without my heart racing. I was reclaiming my life, one boring, normal day at a time. I realized that the greatest victory wasn't the money or the courtroom win, it was the fact that they no longer occupied any space in my head. They were just people I used to know, characters in a story that had finally reached its end. It has been over a year since the day that gavel hit the wood, and my life is quiet now. I have learned to love that quiet. I am no longer looking for approval from people who are fundamentally incapable of giving it. I have a new apartment, a sunlit, 2-bedroom condo in a historic building that I bought with a mortgage that actually has my real, legitimate signature on it. Every time I walk through the front door, I feel a sense of peace that I can't even describe. It isn't just a home, it's a sanctuary built on the truth. I have found a new kind of family, one built on choice and mutual respect rather than obligation and manipulation. There is Naomi, of course, who is more of a sister to me than Sienna ever was. There is Uncle Julian, whom I visit once a month in his small house by the woods. We sit on his porch and talk about the cycles of our family, and we remind each other that we are the ones who made it out alive. He's teaching me how to garden, and for the first time, I'm enjoying something that has nothing to do with finance or success. And there is Grandma Beatrice, whose handwritten notes I keep in a special wooden box on my mantel. She's the only one who truly understood what it cost me to say no. I also became a moderator for an online support group for victims of familial financial abuse. Every other Thursday, I lead a video meeting for people who are currently being hunted by their own families for money. When I tell them about the $650,000 villa and the text messages that saved me, I see the light of hope flicker in their eyes. I tell them that the greatest revenge isn't seeing your parents suffer, it's living a brilliant, independent, and unburdened life. I've helped a young woman named Rachel fight her own battle with parents who stole her student loan money, and seeing her win felt even better than my own victory. Sometimes, in the middle of a quiet Sunday afternoon, I wonder if I should have just been the good daughter and paid the debt. But then I look around my home. I look at the peace in my heart and the strength in my hands. I didn't just win a lawsuit. I broke a chain that had been dragging my family down for 3 generations. I protected my future, I survived the storm, and I learned the most important lesson of my life. Your value is not determined by how much you can be used by others. It is determined by the boundaries you are brave enough to defend. I am Nadine, I am 32, and for the first time in my life, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. I am the architect of my own life, and the foundation is solid as a rock. Am I wrong for letting my parents face bankruptcy and total social isolation and never looking back to help them? Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button to hear more intense and real-life Reddit stories. Leave a comment below with your verdict. Do you think I went too far, or did my parents get exactly what they deserved? Every comment helps this video reach more people, and I truly appreciate your support. See you in the next story.